So here's a little problem that I made up all by myself. So if you find the area under the cosine graph from 0 to pi over 2, it turns out it's exactly 1. And then we're going to use rectangles to estimate the area. And when I do the sum sequence, then I can get the answer 1.001 as an estimate or 0.999. So those would be acceptable because they're within 0.001 of the actual answer. Now use the rectangles. Well, how many? I really don't know, so I'm just going to guess. Try 10 rectangles. So to begin with, delta x will be, take the limits pi over 2 and 0, subtract those, and then divide that into 10 equal pieces, which means that it's pi over 2 divided by a 10, and that is pi over 20. Now look at the x-axis going from 0 to pi over 2. So this first interval would go from 0 to pi over 20. For the last one, well, this is a length of pi over 20, so this right here is pi over 2 minus a pi over 20. What I could do is just leave off the pi and go, this is 1/2 and this is 1/20. So how much is 1/2 minus 1/20? And then change that to a fraction. It's 9/20, so this is 9 pi over 20. Next up, it's most accurate to use the midpoint, so I'm going to use the midpoint. So this right here is halfway between pi over 20 and 0, so that means it's half of pi over 20, which is pi over 40. Then what about this one? So one way to do it is I could average these two numbers, and for that I'm going to leave off the pi for a moment and go, what's the average of 9/20 plus 1/2, add them together and divide by 2. Then change that to a fraction. So that is 19 pi over 40. Then do the sum sequence. The height of each rectangle is going to be cosine of x. The width is going to be delta x. X is the variable. Start at the first red pi over 40. And then go to 19 pi over 40. And the last thing to tell it is delta x pi over 20. So go to second list, math, and then find the sum. Go to second list, operations, and find the sequence. And somebody has been messing with my calculator because this problem's already in here. Let me see if they did it right. Everything except this is supposed to say 19 pi over 40, and then this is pi over 20. Okay, looks like it's typed in correctly, and the answer should be very close to 1. It turned out, first guess! Oh my gosh. Can't believe how smart I am. Okay, so we got a 1.001, but is that the least amount of rectangles? So it worked with 10, what about with 9? So then if you use 9, so delta x is going to be pi over 2 minus 0 over 9, which is going to be pi over 18. So instead of this being a 20, it's going to be an 18. Same there. And then when you do this idea, and this is pi over 18, well then in the middle, if you cut that in half, that's pi over 36. So this is going to be a 36 on the bottom, and this is going to be a 36. Now what about this last interval? So this is pi over 2. And if you go to the left of that, so this is a length of pi over 18. So if I go to the left by pi over 18, so if I have a half and I go to the left by 1/18, then that's 4 pi over 9. And then what's in the middle? So if you take a 4/9 plus a 1/2, and then you divide by 2, that's going to be 17 over 36. 17 pi over 36. So it's going to basically be the same thing, except I just need to change a few of these numbers. So instead of retyping it, I'm just going to screen grab that. And this needs to be changed to the pi over 18. This needs to be changed to 17 pi over 36. This one is pi over 36. And this one is pi over 18. And then the answer is still a 1.001. So that's with 9 rectangles. Well, maybe we only need 8 rectangles. So if n equals 8 rectangles, then delta x is going to be pi over 2 minus 0, divide that by 8. And then when you divide those guys, that's going to be pi over 16. So this first interval goes from 0 to pi over 16. This last interval will be 1/2 minus 1/16. So that's going to be 7 pi over 16. And then for the midpoints, this one, if you cut this in half, it's pi over 32. And then you can average these two, or you could say this point right here is going to be pi over 2 minus pi over 32. So I'll leave off the pi. 1/2 minus 1/32 is 15 pi over 32. So then that one will be sum the sequence, then it's cosine of x times pi over 16, the delta x, and then x goes from pi over 32 to 15 pi over 32, and then the last thing is delta x. So again, you could type it in again, or you could just get one of the old ones and just go change a few of the numbers. And then finally, does it still equal a 1.001? No, this one 0.982. So that one's off by too much. So it turns out that nine rectangles is the least number of rectangles.